In this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about the state of the world. I've been monitoring it on the side a little bit. I haven't been losing my mind or getting too engrossed in all of it, but I think there's some really important geopolitical things happening right now, and there's a few people making YouTube videos about it, which is good. But I wanted to make sure that we put something together for our channel, because I think we're living in a really interesting time. Possibly a really great time. Time will tell, I guess, to see how people adapt to what's going on. But it's got me thinking a lot about what first got me into permaculture and some of the things that I learned about that made me interested in studying this design science. And I want to leave some resources in the show notes down below with regards to some of the resources that I refer to in this video. And so when I first got into permaculture, or started my journey, I was working as a petroleum engineer. And the thing that really made me start thinking that we had to, both Michelle and I had to do something different in our lives, but also society had to start transitioning sooner rather than later, was peak oil. That's always been my thing, because as an engineer, I understand energy. I understand how much energy things take to do. All of our food, our travel, heating our houses, powering all of our appliances and gadgets. All of this stuff is predicated on enormous amounts of fossil fuel. And I truly still believe that we are at the cusp of a decline. And there's a lot of people out there that will argue that peak oil is fake, or it's a conspiracy theory or something. That's fine. If you're part of that camp, I'm not going to sit here and argue with you. You can go and get whatever information you want on it. I think there's plenty of good evidence to indicate that it's pretty much inevitable. And just a couple of things that make me ponder it. We wouldn't probably be extracting oil sands right now if we weren't kind of at the end of the barrel, so to speak, because for every unit of energy, actually for every 10 units of energy we put into the oil sands, we get 11 out. It's a really poor energy return on energy invested. To put that in perspective, Saudi oil 100 years ago, we were getting 20,000 barrels out of the hole for 1 barrel invested in. And so the energy return on energy invested is really low, and the same goes for shale gas and shale oil. And so those are all interesting metrics. People look at total production or oil reserves as metrics with regards to whether we're running out or not, and they always come up with arguments as to why we're not, and then they'll make claims about technology and how it's going to improve the ability for us to extract energy from the ground. And those are all fine, but they only really tell part of the story. And you need to understand several metrics within the oil and gas and even coal and nuclear story in order to be able to understand what's actually going on. And so one of my favorite resources to explore, if you're new to this concept of peak oil, I was actually talking to one of my colleagues 2 weeks ago, who's pretty tuned into things, and he had never heard of this concept of peak oil. So if that's you and you're new to this concept, I highly recommend checking out Chris Martinson's course, the Crash Course, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes down below. It's about a 3-hour lecture, and it's really well done. Chris Martinson does a great job of making complex subjects really easy to understand. So go check that out. This year we're actually being confronted with an energy crisis. With this Ukrainian-Russia war going on. Russia's a major oil exporter to the world. I believe it's like 9% of global oil production comes from Russia. And so if you understand the oil markets, really small changes in supply and demand can have enormous consequences with regards to price. And so a 9% swing is a really big swing in the oil and gas world. One of the reasons that is that we just don't have a lot of above ground storage for oil. And so oil is one of those resources that we kind of depend upon to be produced in almost real time. And you might think, well, what about the strategic petroleum reserve in the United States? And I think there's like 800 million barrels or something in that reserve. But when you're consuming 90 million barrels of oil a day globally, 800 million barrels in a strategic petroleum reserve represents 10 days of production. Globally, it's really insignificant. I think the US consumes somewhere between 8 and 12 million barrels of oil a day. I haven't really kept up with the demand characteristics in the United States, but it's a lot of oil that they consume. And so even at 10 or 12 million barrels of oil a day, assuming that they were going to continue to supply domestic consumption, 800 million barrels is not a lot of oil. And so literally everything that we touch, everything we use is predicated on the availability of inexpensive energy. And so 1 barrel of oil is 25,000 man-hours of labor. And so if you take $100 barrel oil, which it isn't quite yet, but it's going to probably be here very soon, and you divide $100 by 25,000, you can see why every hour labor, basically every hour of labor you get out of a barrel of oil, does not cost very much, even at $100. And yet our economy starts to come to a standstill when we get to that price. And that's because we've built our entire life around wasteful devices like cars that use enormous amounts of fuel, houses that are energy hogs, and even wanting to have avocados shipped from Australia or California at any time of the year so that we can consume foods that don't even grow in our ecosystem. So energy is kind of one piece to the whole equation this year. Another piece with this war going on in the Ukraine and Russia is the fact that Russia is one of the largest, I think it is the largest grain exporter in the world, and Ukraine is number 5. And so we're potentially going to be losing massive quantities of grain in the global food supply chain. Now, that's just not going to affect your Cheerios. That's going to affect pork prices. That's going to affect beef prices because we feed these animals the grain, and whether we should or shouldn't is a whole other conversation. But currently in the existing industrial paradigm, those two, pork, beef, chicken, they all depend upon massive grain inputs in order to be able to grow these animals fast and inexpensive. And so we're going to see massive increases in meat prices this year as a result of a decline in grain exports. In 1986, the world surpassed peak grain, meaning that we never have produced more grain per capita than we did in 1986. And at any given time, if you read any of Richard Heinberg's work, one of the books that I recommend from him is, actually he's got a whole series of them, Peak Everything, Power Down, The Party's Over. They're all really great books. Richard Heinberg in his books not only talks about peak grain happening in 1986, and I believe that was in his book Peak Everything, but he also talks about how at any given time there's only ever been about 18 months of food stored on planet Earth. And that is really what he's looking at, grain supplies in silos essentially. And so the world lives very close to the margin. And so as our population increases, it doesn't take very many supply disruptions in order to destabilize these supply chains, which operate just in time at the margin, because not only are they trying to supply the world with food or energy or any of the other materials that we require, but they're trying to do it just in time so that they can maximize profits, which is how our current economic paradigm operates. Companies want to maximize shareholder value, and that's how they've been set up and optimized. And so that's great if you're going to try and optimize something for profit or for maximizing production or whatever your optimization is. But when you depend upon a system whose optimization is not based upon food security or nutrient density or resilience, then, and if you put all your eggs into that basket and you are relying upon the fact that food is always going to be at Costco or at Safeway or at Save on Foods, wherever you go buy your food, and all of a sudden you have a couple of black swans like COVID, Ukraine, Russia, even Fukushima, any number of these black swans can cause massive supply disruptions. And you don't really have to have that supply disruption last for very long before it has massive implications. And so recently a video from an economist came across my desk. And I can't remember his last name exactly, Peter Zehan, I think. I'll put his video in the show notes down below as well. And based upon all the macros that I just talked about, and actually there's a few others that I'll mention here in a minute, he's predicting that there's going to be a global famine by Q4, and up to 1 billion people are going to be starving by the end of this year. And while we're pretty privileged here in North America to have robust economies and fairly robust supply chains, we've got a big agricultural base, we've got a big land base, we've got access to water and timber and a lot of the raw materials that allow an advanced economy to continue to move forward. We still are highly dependent upon China, which is in a state of collapse right now, and we will definitely feel the pain. And so people now are talking a lot about hyperinflation and dollars going less far than they used to go, and these are all the result of all of these cataclysms going on around the planet. One of the things that Peter talks about in his video as well is phosphorus and nitrogen. And so Ukraine and Russia are big nitrogen exporters, and so nitrogen is one of the key ingredients in industrial agriculture. It's a byproduct of natural gas. One of the reasons Russia produces so much is because they have a big natural gas supply. And so the global nitrogen situation has come into peril. Now, good thing, if you're into permaculture, you know that we don't need to depend on synthetic fertilizers. You can find other ways to get nitrogen into your soil with livestock, with nitrogen fixers, and even mulching. If you mulch with the right things, there's other ways to bring nitrogen into our cropping systems. But again, the majority of the world lives on an industrial system that is completely dependent upon the Haber-Bosch process, which is how we generate nitrogen. And as you start, if you remove the nitrogen input in 1 year, like ripping the Band-Aid off, you're going to see massive supply reductions in the first, second, and probably third year on that field. Because most of the soils on planet Earth now are basically hydroponic growing mediums. There's not much life left in them. They're essentially set up to support plants, literally just to act as scaffolding. And then we inject water-soluble nutrients into the soil in order to grow them. So they don't grow nutrient-dense plants. They're susceptible to pests, which is why we spray them with so much herbicides and pesticides. And when you take away that nitrogen, they're going to grow poorly. Their yields are going to go down. They may even be susceptible to more pests because there's no microbes to actually support a functional microbiome in the soil. And so we're going to see a major supply disruption in the food system, probably in the next couple of years, unless some miracle happens. We've also got to contend with peak phosphorus, which is only a few years away now. And I've been talking about this for over a decade, as have a lot of people. And you can Google this and find all sorts of articles on peak phosphorus. Phosphorus is one of the most important nutrients for actually seed production. And so nitrogen generally supports the leafy green material of the plant, and phosphorus supports the seeds. And so because we depend upon grain-based agriculture, annual grain-based agriculture globally in the industrial system, phosphorus or lack of phosphorus in the soils is going to reduce the grain output in of itself. And so even though we have a disruption in phosphorus this year, we also have a long-term phosphorus problem that we're going to have to deal with because most of the phosphorus in the world comes from Morocco, a little bit in the US, a little bit in China. And so my gut is that at some point there's going to be a war in Morocco in order to fight over the last remaining phosphorus on Earth. The Falklands Wars was fought over bird guano, and that was the original phosphorus source, was basically fossilized bird poop. And that was a war that was fought many years ago. You can Google the Falkland Wars. Phosphorus is also really important for gunpowder, and so we are literally kind of at peak everything, which is one of Richard Heinberg's books. Peak coal, peak phosphorus, peak natural gas, peak oil, peak food. And I started to see this when I was in the oil patch, and I learned about Chris Martenson and a few other people, Richard Heinberg, James Howard Kunstler. There were a variety of authors that I read. One of the other ones, Andrew Nikiforuk, his book, The Energy of Slaves. And it was pretty dim when I started reading all this stuff, when I started going down this path. I remember driving up to our cottage one weekend and looking at Michelle and telling her that we were going to be driving horse and cart at some point, and she thought I was crazy. She probably still thinks that I'm crazy right now, but you start to be able to see how that could become a reality in the future if you remove the energy density of fossil fuels in the way that we do things. And so this year, Verge is going through a massive transformation right now. We recognize that as a result of COVID, we recognize that we were able to provide a much larger number of people with information that they can use to help deal with some of these problems. And I think that's really the message that I want to convey in this video, is that yes, things are dire, but as a result of science, as a result of human evolution, as a result of the Industrial Revolution and all of the things we've learned in the last, specifically in the last 100 years, but if you take all the knowledge that we've had for at least 2,000 or 3,000 years, and then all the knowledge we gained in the last 100, and you put it all together, I mean, that's really what this concept of permaculture is. It's the resilient design of food, energy, water, shelter, waste, and community, and even economy into systems that allow people to take control of their supply chains, either on their own property or within a subset of community. As a result of COVID, we ended up having to go online. And when we started delivering our permaculture design course online, we noticed we were able to help a ton more people than we were when we were delivering live courses. And we got really good at online delivery. And in fact, we were completely blown away by the quality of projects that people were producing. But resoundingly, the students kept coming back to us and said, now what? And we've always known that the permaculture design course is a great place to start and a horrible place to end. And so this year, we're working hard behind the scenes to launch a brand new website. We are launching the Verge Academy, where we're going to be helping you to deal with these liabilities that are literally at our front door. And so we're taking a servant leadership approach where we're going to bring the world's experts on permaculture to your front door and to help you to develop your permaculture property, whether you're just getting into the market right now to buy a piece of property and you need help trying to figure out which property to buy, or if you're already kind of moving towards or down that permaculture path and needing some support, potentially an accountability partner, you need information at the right time, at the right place, in the right amount. We're working really hard to bring all of those people together so that you can succeed the first time when you go and build your property. In my mind, having looked at various forms of architecture, engineering, and having traveled the world to multiple countries and seeing how other people are managing these liabilities, whether it's in renewable energy institutes or other permaculture spaces, out of all the things that Michelle and I have studied around the world, in my opinion, permaculture is the only design system that can address the complexities and the nuance of what we're in the middle of right now. We're literally entering into a maelstrom, and I've been pretty conscious about not putting too much fear up onto our channel over the last 10 years, knowing that people can go and find this information in other places. This channel has always been about positivity and solutions and will continue to be that. But I felt it really important today to take a few moments to discuss some of the things that have come across my desk recently that I think are pretty close to what we've been talking about over the last decade in our permaculture design courses, things that we need to be consciously thinking about as the world comes to peak everything. So if you're at the very beginning of your journey, I recommend you spend a bit of time on this channel. You'll find a lot of really great positive solutions. I'd also recommend you go over to our website and sign up for our newsletter, and I'll leave a link to that down below. And if you have not taken a permaculture design course, that is a fantastic place to start. We're going to be launching our PDC for 2022 in June of this year. And so if you're on our newsletter, you'll get notified about it right away. We're going to be doing a summit later in the year. And in that summit, we're going to be bringing some of these amazing experts onto YouTube live to you guys so that you can learn from them. And then from that summit, we're going to be launching our academy. We're really excited to continue to serve our community And I would love to hear any of your comments or ideas or things that you think we should be including in our new academy, things that you want to learn, things that you're concerned about and want us to help you to address. And we'll do our best to serve you on our end. Make sure that you hit subscribe on the video if you're not subscribed here already, and I'll see you in the next video. And
he's just dropping a deuce in the corner of your video.
you can put this in as the blooper reel.
He was gonna do that as he walked into the corner of the thing. I was like, oh my god, he's totally right.
One thing's for certain, and that's that nothing's for certain.